Joining me now is Patrick O'Flynn, former UKIP MEP and the sharp mind behind State of the Nation on Substack. There's plenty of material to be going on there if you're talking about the state of this nation at the moment. It's a must-read for anyone keeping tabs on Britain's ever-shifting political tides. With Reform UK now, of course, past 20% in the polls, my friends, that's a political tide that's very much coming in. It's clear that they are really quite rattled, the establishment, by this unforeseen event. Nigel Farage, his rumoured links to Elon Musk, he was with him at Mar-a-Lago on Monday of this week, they've only added to that panic. As critics rush to paint reform as a dangerous force in British politics, you had former Labour Mother of the House, Harriet Harman, saying just that, and of course an acting leader of the Labour Party. But what does this all mean for the future of the electoral landscape and the two-party system? Patrick's the man to help us unpack it all. Could this Elon Musk reform axis, could this be the next seismic shift in Britain's political landscape? And what does it say, my friends, about the appetite for real change in the country? Is Elon Musk, tech titan, genius of a man, the right man to ally himself with a party like Reform to bring about change in a country such as Britain? Well, Patrick O'Flynn joins me now. Patrick, thank you very much for your company.
Good afternoon, Darren.
Patrick, on that point, Elon Musk himself, I mean, you're an SDP man these days. Are you sort of put off by the idea of a tech titan coming across to Britain and trying to help us out?
No, I'm not put off at all. I mean, I'm a member of the SDP, not particularly an active one, because I approve of their values, and I think they've been the very best party standing up against woke, against mass migration. And I hope to see them prosper. But I also understand that at the moment, the party that's in pole position to smash the establishment cartel is very much Reform UK. And just having Elon Musk interested in it, I think is a masterstroke from Nigel Farage, who, you know, he's a much more seasoned party leader, Nigel is, than the other party leaders who are fairly kind of new to politics even, and I think you're seeing the difference. So Elon Musk is a name which is very sexy to younger voters. He's very on trend or on the zeitgeist, to use that phrase. And just seeing Nigel in that photograph with him, having met him, having talked about money, that's a really high profile event, whether or not the enormous sum of money mentioned follows. If it does follow, that clearly, you know, even if it's a tenth of the $100 million, that's enough to drastically equalise the playing field that Reform's playing on as regards the Tories and Labour, or potentially, if it's the full amount, to make them the financial kingpins. And I think it's a terrible problem for the establishment parties if they're seen to kind of rewrite the rules to block this money. Then again, they're just behaving like a cartel, and it looks like they haven't got the arguments to defeat the Reform challenge.
And Patrick, on that point, why did the establishment never have an issue? I can remember, and you were obviously a big Brexiteer yourself, I remember it well. I can remember chronicling when I worked at Brexit Central, actually going through and chronicling what happened during those post-Brexit years. The immediate aftermath, George Soros was heavily involved in funding outfits that he wanted to stop Brexit. Now, if that isn't election interference or interference in democracy, I don't know what is. So are the establishment being incredibly selective in their outrage?
Oh, they definitely are. And I think another aspect of that is you may have seen Harriet Harman complaining on television at the weekend that Reform were actually a threat to democracy by standing in elections, giving people more policy choice, more ideas to back or not back. What she obviously meant was that they're a threat to the cartel that's failed the British public. So, you know, I think that Nigel Farage is going to have a really big year in 2025. The Elon Musk money issue. I think that's just one thing that terrifies the establishment. But I think even if Elon Musk doesn't come through with most of that money, just seeing the new Trump administration get going in America, start cutting taxes, start particularly expelling illegal immigrants. We've already seen Meloni in power in Italy. We saw Wilders win the elections in the Netherlands. Everyone expects Le Pen's party to do very well. Perhaps she even becomes the next president of France. The AfD has a crack at coming second, potentially in Germany in February. All across the Western world, this issue of border control and breaking free of these globalist compacts which prevent countries protecting themselves from the scourge of mass illegal immigration. That's becoming, a really existential issue, and none of the establishment parties in our country are willing to grasp the nettle on that. And I think people look at Nigel Farage and think, well, this guy has got a quarter of a century of credibility warning about excessive immigration. And actually, the more the establishment figures scream and holler about him, it almost enhances his attraction to a lot of voters.
Indeed. Let's have a little watch of a video that took place last night on BBC Newsnight, in which Lewis Goodall, who used to work for the BBC, but he left the BBC to go join a global podcast alongside Emily Thornberry, I almost said there, Emily Maitlis, and I bet she listens to it though, Patrick, and John Sopel, who was also at the BBC. But this is what Lewis Goodall, had to say about the Elon Musk in the most sneering fashion, it has to be said.
Lewis, what is Nigel Farage's strategy? What is Elon Musk doing as well? Why is he so interested in Britain?
It's a very intriguing question, Victoria. Look, I think British politics is asleep at the moment about this. I think that this is going to be whatever happens in 2029, assuming the general election. That's an eon away. But I don't think that there is any doubt that reform and the rise of reform, and there will be people watching this who get very angry when people like me say this, but it is going to be one of the dominant themes of our politics next year. And that is because clearly it's part of an international context, which we're seeing populist forces, particularly on the populist right, doing extremely well throughout Europe. There's no reason to suggest that Britain will be immune to that. We can see that reform are doing better and better in the opinion polls. And I think the Musk connection is central. And I'm amazed, actually, in conversations with certainly the government, although I must say not Labour MPs, that many ministers feel asleep to me about the potential vulnerability that there is in the British political system. Why do I say that? Because both our electoral law and the law governing donations, and particularly the online space in Britain, is completely antiquated. The last time either were properly updated was 20 years ago. It is completely clear that if Musk wanted to, he could funnel enormous amounts of money via a UK subsidiary. And although we have election spending limits, which we do, 35 million for a big party, in the outside of the short or long campaign, he could funnel that money into online ads. He could help reform in all sorts of organisational ways, in a way that we have never quite seen a donation like that before. And who's to say that 100 million will be the end of it? Well, I mean, to the rest of us, that's like 10 pence. It is small change to Elon Musk, and the government needs to wake up to it.
I mean, not quite, Patrick. That's the biggest amount of hyperbole I think I've ever seen on the BBC, and that's saying something. But I mean, this all stems, does it not, from Musk taking over X, arguably amplifying reform-like voices and giving free speech to those who would be censored by other platforms. I mean, how significant is the role of X itself in shaping insurgency movements? And is that why you think they're so rattled and angry, talking about changing electoral law to block Elon Musk's capacity to support reform?
I think X, what I still find hard not to refer to as Twitter, has been very instrumental. I mean, before Elon Musk took over X, if you entered into a debate with a militant trans person, and you wouldn't accept that person was the gender they identified as, and if you used anything implying that you thought they were actually the biological sex they really were, you would get chucked off Twitter. the wrath of hell would be lowered upon your head. And it was the same with lots of other issues, including the immigration issue. There was a real chilling, so-called liberal left hegemony going on, which actually stopped these issues being spoken about. And many normal, ordinary people who are patriotic about their country, but not versed in the jargon of the political elite, they felt unwilling and unsure what they were allowed to say. Now, Elon Musk coming along and actually getting rid of all that kind of woke handcuffs has opened out the space, and I think it has had quite a dramatic effect, not just in America, but over here as well. We've had GB News, obviously, helping to break up the viewpoint cartel on British broadcast media too, which has had a big effect. And suddenly you're seeing this birth of social conservatism, particularly among young male voters, which is really galloping on. Nigel Farage is tearing up trees on TikTok, massively outperforming any other political leader. And it's almost like it's the end of an era. And once the peak woke, peak liberal left establishment view, comes off the peak, it's going to crash very quickly. So I think Musk taking over Twitter and turning it into X and making it much more of a free speech, even-handed platform for points of view has been really significant. And I tell you what, the other thing about Elon Musk is, whatever you think of him, he is the most successful business person in the world, right? And if he is telling Britain, you're going the wrong way, a lot of people who aren't political anoraks and obsessives are going to look at that and say, well, actually, that's what I think. That's what it feels like. Nigel Farage is alongside this guy. This looks like the future to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, what extent do you think they will really clamp down on this? How far do you think they'll push it in order to block this alliance being able to take shape in any meaningful way electorally?
Well, they may try and invent new rules on donations, which will be seen specifically as trying to block reform getting access to resources, right? So if you're going to change a law for some sort of high-minded pro-democracy reason, you need to do it when there's not a kind of obvious vested interest that everyone can see smacking you in the face, So I think that the risk that the establishment parties have is they'll do themselves as much damage as anything by being seen to block a kind of new choice, new entrant in the market from getting going, that they won't succeed now because Nigel Farage has the volume and the voice and the supporters flocking to him to make a real dent in the establishment anyway, irrespective of Musk. And all those establishment figures will do is to wind up normal people against them even more. And Lewis Goodall there, he's a very bright guy. He's very astute. And he was one of the few people when he was on the BBC that kind of understood some of the momentum for Brexit. But he's very much seems to have gone whole hog in with the Emily Mate, this John Sopel, a kind of aloof Remainer elite view now. And everything he talked about there was if you like, processology. He never got to, and the government needs to stop this, right? He never got to analysing what is it which is appealing to more and more British voters about what reform is offering, and what is it that the consensus of the last 25 years, Lib Dem, Labour, Tory, has failed to deliver. So it's about substance ultimately. Elon Musk or no Elon Musk, $100 million or no $100 million. If Nigel Farage has got the substance to win the arguments, then there'll be no stopping him next year.
I want to ask you about Kemi Badenoch in a second. But before I do that, on Nigel himself, I mean, you've known him for many years. What do you make of the criticism around him, as far as some pockets of the right are concerned, around what he said to Winston Marshall on his podcast about Islam and how the UK politically needs to recognise that Islam is growing in Britain and will therefore represent a significant electoral force. And any political party that basically says, we don't want Muslim votes, well, stands to die a death. Do you think there is merit to that argument, or do you see this as appeasement of sorts?
I wouldn't go as far as say it's appeasement. I think Nigel is, boxing clever at the moment. He also got into flack for appearing to go reasonably soft on the idea of deporting some migrants, with the implication that these would be illegal migrants, and he seemed to set his face against mass deportations. Well, what I would say is that if there are three potential prime ministers at the next election, and they're Keir Starmer, Kemi Badenoch, at the head of 50% Lib Demi Tory MPs, or Nigel with a Reform majority, my judgment is you would get much stronger policies, both on immigration control and deporting illegal immigrants and overstayers, and standing up to militant Islam and its spread across particularly our major cities. You get much stronger policies in action from a Farage-led administration than from either of the other two.
The UKIP point, having been there yourself, been there, done that, in UKIP's heyday, really, the halcyon days of 2015, what can they learn? What lessons can they learn to avoid the pitfalls that actually held UKIP back electorally, but also internally? It seemed to me to be quite a fractious, shall we say, outfit, but certainly by the end. And I'm wondering, have you any reflections on what they can do to avoid that happening? Are they making the right calls? They've got Nick Candy in as treasurer. They've got Zia Youssef as chairman. Successful guys, the pair of them. Are they already making the right foundational approaches to actually avoid the pitfalls of the past?
I think they are. And also, I think Nigel already has broadened his appeal considerably since those days of UKIP. You have to remember that UKIP was depicted by establishment media as, quote, the BNP in suits back in the day, when it began from very small beginnings, just making this at the time, unacceptable argument that we should be outside the European Union in charge of our own affairs. And the UKIP story was going from sort of 1% in the polls to 4 million votes in the 2015 election, taking enough votes primarily off the Conservatives when they were in coalition with the Lib Dems to force their hand to offer a referendum, and really, in its own terms, its own life as a party, but becoming the most successful political party of the 20th century. It had one big aim, and it's, more or less totally imperfectly, obviously, but achieved that aim. Now, since then, Nigel has very skillfully used broadcasting to get better at communication, to become less off-putting to sort of people who still see themselves as being in the cautious centre, and to broaden the brand, which he did very successfully with the pop-up one-year Brexit party to save Brexit from the clutches of Theresa May. And you'll note the sort of people he brought in as Brexit party candidates. I remember Annunziata Rees-Mogg being a bit of a masterstroke in terms of a business-orientated Tory figure to bring over more Tory voters. And I think Nigel in his GB News show has broadened out his appeal further. He's gathered authority and stature. And I think what's happening with Reform just builds on that broad direction. And that might be one reason why some of the old, true, die-hard Farage supporters might be feeling at the moment, is he slightly diluting the message? Well, I think he's broadening appeal, and they're obsessed with getting from being what they are now, which, as you said, is a 20-something% party, to becoming a 30% party, because under first past the post, always the great enemy of UKIP, the great enemy of the Brexit party, and indeed of Reform to an extent at the last election. But under first past the post, if you can be a 30% party, and the other two main establishment parties are struggling on 25%, then suddenly it starts paying out seats, like a jukebox with all the symbols coming up in alignment. So they are seriously thinking of hitting 30%, seeing that Labour and the Tories might be on 23, 24, 25% each, and then winning literally scores, potentially even hundreds of three-way marginal contests in 2029. Obviously, there's the stepping stones of the local elections next year and the year after, the Senedd elections, and actually reform is starting to get traction in Scotland, and no Nigel Farage-led party ever has really had that. And I think that's a real sign of a broadening appeal and a sort of sense of dynamism behind Nigel.
Yes, music to our ears, I've no doubt. The final question I want to put to you, Patrick, is around, I think we're both probably pretty sympathetic to much of the Kemi Badenoch platform. And by that, I mean this anti-identity politics, standing against that real poison of the woke mind virus that seeped through British life and institutions. And she has been, for a long time, a real staunch opponent to all of that. But I'm a bit disappointed by the Conservatives, right? They just seem to have totally left any form of opposition to reform, despite the fact reform only have 5 MPs. So what do you see as the future of the Conservative Party under Kemi's leadership? Do you think actually reform, they don't need to talk about agreements with the Tories because they're going to ride roughshod over them? Absolutely.
Well, I agree with you that I think Kemi's been very cautious in her first, whatever it is, 6-7 weeks in office. And if you look at the shadow cabinet, you've got Mel Stride as shadow chancellor and Priti Patel as shadow foreign secretary. Now Priti Patel was the Home Secretary presiding over that deliberate, letting the rocket boosters go under immigration levels, right? Lowering the earnings thresholds, relaxing rules on students, bringing independence. She was behind, no doubt at Boris Johnson's behest, this enormous escalation in legal immigration that we saw completely against their manifesto promise. And yet she's given one of the top jobs. And Mel Stride was chair of the Treasury Select Committee, cheering on the idea of lowering earnings thresholds, getting more foreign nationals in to do low-paid, low tax-paying jobs, which weren't worth it for Britain. And the language that Kemi has addressed the betrayal of the Brexit Red Wall vote by the last government, particularly on immigration, has been very mealy-mouthed and underpowered. We made mistakes. She's not even particularly saying what she intends to do about them. And then there's that video clip from 2018 showing her sort of cheering on a relaxation of some immigration rules. So I think when even Keir Starmer is taunting you in the House of Commons about being reckless on immigration levels, that's a really difficult position to be in. But having said that, I haven't given up on her. She won the leadership with this pitch: I'm an engineer, I'm going to go away and do a systematic review of how things work and come back with policies. So, if Tory MPs are sort of calm and resolute and not headless chickens, and that's a big if, then maybe Kemi will come back in 2 years' time with some genuinely impressive policies about getting a grip on our border, bringing back growth to the economy. But the danger for her is that the MPs will panic after reform cleans up in May, does even better the following year, particularly in Wales and Scotland, and then do the Tories pitch into yet another leadership election. And I think the big problem for the Conservatives is they're sort of 40 of them are Lib Dems, really. 40 of them are Conservatives, and 40 of them go whichever way the wind is blowing. So people like you and me and others who share our views, we couldn't really at the moment say we could vote Conservative with any conviction or any sense of sureness about what we would get afterwards. You could get, anything from Mel Stride to John Hayes and Robert Jenrick, and it could be any mixture of that, depending which faction of the party is in control at any one time. And when you vote reform, I think, everyone in reform wants to leave the ECHR. Everyone in reform would cut foreign aid. Everyone in reform would be tougher on crime. It's a united party. And you could argue Labour and the Lib Dems are fundamentally internally united on a lot of stuff. I mean, I happen to disagree with their positions. With the Conservatives, you don't know what you're going to get. And it seems very difficult for Kemi. She hasn't got many MPs to choose from to form a shadow cabinet, but she's doing this broad church, we're united. Well, I don't want the Conservatives to be united. I want them to be coherent, and I want to know what version of conservatism they're asking us to vote for.
And that's how they won in 2019, right? Because Dominic Cummings said, we're going to take the whip away from all of the Brexit rebels and anyone that stands in our way. And he did that. And the country said, I want this. I want to get Brexit done, as they promised, and gave them an 80-seat majority. So I agree with you. Frankly, disunited parties do not win elections, and I can't see any way of actually proving to the public that they are a united party that stands for one particular thing. They are, as you say, a hodgepodge of liberals and wets and then dry Brexiteers. It's a mess. So it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be fascinating to watch. And Patrick, we'll check out your Substack to chronicle all of it. So thank you very much for your time today, my friend.
It's been a pleasure, a privilege to be on the show.
Still watching? Well, I've got a quick ask for you. Recent UK, we're fighting the woke brigade and inspiring young Brits, but we need your help to go bigger. We're hosting a fundraiser and would love you to sign up and share the link on the big day. It's easy, it makes a massive impact, and there are prizes for top fundraisers. Click the Google form in the description to join us. Cheers very much. Let's keep going together.